was just looking at the date of the when I made the PDF for the first packet of the Imrei Yaakov. It was April of 2020. So we've been doing this for exactly 3 years. It took us 3 years to get through the entire Sefer. And I think we need to do some kind of celebration or something in order to mark this this momentous completion. But we'll see. Okay, maybe after Purim. Okay, the very first siman was Dine Mechira umatana ushliach uba'apotropos ubo yud zayin seifim, the laws of selling and buying and gifting, and a shliach and an apotropos and custodianship. And we've touched upon all of these issues over the last several months, so you should be somewhat familiar. But I remember at the very end of the Sefer, we talked about keeping your word and the importance of keeping your word. And that's really how the Rav Shulchan Aruch had started this whole section on Choshen Mishpat. And just as a reminder, what's unique about the Rav Shulchan Aruch, you know that there's a Shulchan Aruch and then there's the Rav Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch was written by Rav Yosef Karo in the 16th century. And the Rav Shulchan Aruch was written by Rav Shner Zalman of Liadi in the 18th century. Rav Shner Zalman essentially started, basically, that's the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, but he was also an incredible, not only was he an incredible scholar of what we would call Nistar, of the hidden aspects of the Torah, and he was one of the progenitors of Chassidus, but he was also a master of Nigle, of the exposed Torah, and teaching us how to live our lives. So what he did is that he basically took the Shulchan Aruch and reconstituted it to make it a little bit more digestible, because by his time, so many commentaries had already been written on the Shulchan Aruch, and he incorporated all of these commentaries that he was familiar with and gave his final psak. The Mishnah Berurah quotes the Rav Shulchan Aruch quite often, as do many other poskim who came after the Rav Shulchan Aruch. And so the reason why Rav Stern, who wrote this, the Sefer, the commentary, Imrei Yaakov, decided to write a Mishnah Berurah style commentary on the Rav Shulchan Aruch instead of the Shulchan Aruch itself, is because when you look at Choshen Mishpat, which is the portion of Shulchan Aruch that deals with finance, it really has applications to both judges and to the layman, because it also deals with how to constitute courts, what the responsibilities of the judges are in hearing cases, how they accept witnesses' testimony, and all of the other details that are really pertinent only to when you're a judge. Maybe Marvin, maybe one day you'll get called to the bench and you'll have to go through those halachos. But for the rest of us who will never be judges, will never be dayanim, it doesn't have as many applications, unless, or you don't even have to get called to the bench. It's helpful to learn those halachos if you're an arbitrator. You have acted as an arbitrator. Really? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, well, there you go. So then maybe Marvin, can you fix a parking ticket for me? That's really an excellent question. Moshe's question is, how do we get the bottom line? Because there's so many different farms. There's the Kitzer, there's the Aruch HaShulchan, there's the Chayei Adam, there's the Rav Shulchan Aruch, there's the Mishnah Berurah. Who do we go to be the final arbiter? For years in my upbringing, it was always you go to the Mishnah Berurah for the final. And guys my age, such as yourself, that's how we were raised. About 20 years ago, a number of Rashi Yeshiva, including Rav Hershel Schachter, felt that, argued, at least it was brought to my attention that the argument was, maybe it's been going on for much longer, that the Aruch HaShulchan by Rav Epstein is a more reliable arbiter of final psak halacha. And so there are people who actually, when there's a machlokas between the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan, will actually side with the Aruch HaShulchan. And I've done that a few times. Like, for example, the prohibition of clapping on Shabbos. The Mishnah Berurah is machmir, and the Aruch HaShulchan is more makel. And so I'm more makel like the Aruch HaShulchan. Why am I more makel, right? So that's just one example. It's because I feel that people gravitate to piskei halacha that is more in line with their personalities. And I came to a conclusion a while ago that we need more clapping in our world. We need more singing. And so if I could find a heter, I would rely on that heter. Because why? Because when you come to shul, people are half dead, right? And we need to try and revive things. No, I mean that very seriously. We need to instill our davening with more neshama, with more soul and more spirit. Especially people are exhausted Friday night. So that's why I make a point of trying to clap during the singing, even though sometimes I'm the only person in the synagogue. So that's just one example. Why do people, what's the argument to side more with and by the way, the Aruch HaShulchan and the Mishnah Berurah, contemporaries, right? The Aruch HaShulchan actually cites something from a few times from the Mishnah Berurah because it's written maybe just a few years, but they're really being written at the same time. They're really contemporaries. Why is the Aruch HaShulchan considered more reliable or authoritative? The difference is because the Chafetz Chaim was not a Rav of a community. He had a small yeshiva in a small town called Radin, and he based his Piskei Halacha on research. And the Aruch HaShulchan, in addition to having excellent research, had a practical shteller. He had to deal with balabatim, and he saw what was going on in the Jewish community. And so he based a lot of his Piskei Halacha on issues that people were doing, and he wanted to try and be more accommodating to prevalent practices within the Jewish world. No, not always. Not always. No. But one should, if there is a machlokas between the Aruch HaShulchan and the Mishnah Berurah, which isn't that often, one should strive to sort of at least research what the basis of the Aruch HaShulchan is. I'm not saying you always paskin like the Aruch HaShulchan. Some people do say that, but I mean, I've been raised with the Mishnah Berurah as my primary psak. But then you also have the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, who also was a shul rav and based himself on what the community was doing. The Chayei Adam is the same, but that's even older, right? So there's a number of different compendia, but primarily it's since they are the last poskim of very, very strong background, we rely on the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan. Now, there is a new set of Sfarim that is attempting to be the Mishnah Berurah of the 21st century, and that's this Sfarim called Pinine Halacha. Have you heard of Pinine Halacha by Rabbi Eliezer Melamed? That is all the rage now in Eretz Yisrael. He is in every single mamlachti dati religious public school in Israel. That is the sefer that is used to teach the students halacha. So it is becoming by default, at least in Eretz Yisrael, the go-to psak halacha sefer of the 21st century. Is there some controversy? Yes, because there are certain other great rabbis who have seen some of the piskei halacha, especially in issues of taharas mishpacha, that they were critical of. They felt that Rabbi Melamed was makel on certain issues where he shouldn't have been. But that's all in the background. In other words, that should not deter someone from studying Pinine Halacha. It's actually a more readable format. It's more like a Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, it's much more straightforward. So if there was a desire to do Pinine Halacha, we could, but it's not on every section of Shulchan Aruch. We want to stay focused on Choshen Mishpat. I don't think he has anything on Choshen Mishpat, but I have to look into that. Okay. Anyway, so that's. Did I answer your question? Okay. Good. All right. Okay. So let's just learn a line from the Rav Shulchan Aruch. Af al pi she'ein hamekach nigmar bidvarim bilvad. Even though, that's how we start the sentence, even though purchases are not consummated through words alone. Urishai kol echad mehem lachzar bo min hadin. And therefore, even if two people have agreed on a price and agreed on the sale, but it's only been a verbal agreement, technically, each side can back out. Va'afilu kilalas mishapara ein sarach lekabel im lo nasan maos. And even though you don't even get cursed if no one's put down any money. And what he means by saying, even though no one gets cursed when you don't put down money, is that the Gemara says that if you put down money, but you haven't exchanged the goods yet, then too, you could also back out on the deal, but you have to accept a curse upon yourself for going back on something that you've already made a physical transaction over because you've put down money. And the Gemara says the reason is because ma'os einon konos, is because just putting down money without actually making a kinyan on the goods does not consummate the deal either. But at least you've started the transaction. So even though you're allowed to back out, you still have to you get cursed for backing out of a deal that you've already started. We're even before that point where a person hasn't even yet put down any money. There's been no physical exchange whatsoever. Arei hachozer bo, nonetheless. So there's been no money down. There's been no kinyan. There's just a verbal agreement. So I go to Moshe and say, Moshe, I want to buy your widgets. Moshe says, here's the cost. I say, Moshe, can you come down a little bit? Moshe comes down. I said, okay, I'm happy with that price. Do we have a deal? Moshe says, we have a deal. Where this is all on the phone, okay? And then I call him back the next day and says, listen, I'm sorry, but I've decided not to purchase your widgets, okay? So what's my status? I don't get a curse, but what am I? Harei hachozer bo mimechusarei amana. He's called a mechusar amana. You've heard that term before if you've been studying with us. A mechusar amana is a person who acts in bad faith. Word amana, emuna. He's lacking good faith. And ve'ein ruach hachamim nocha hemenu. And the spirit of the sages is unhappy with him. Right? It means nothing. It means nothing. But if you're a God-fearing, but if it's fascinating that the Rav Shulchan Aruch opens up with a halacha that has zero ramifications in real life. But you want to know why this is important? Because at the end of the day, you're going to go to Shacharis now, put on your talis and tefillin, and stand before the Ribono Shel Olam, just you and God. And you've got to be able to stand before Hashem and be able to look at yourself in the mirror and have God look at you. And have God be proud of you. Yeah, all of those have to be taken into consideration. We're still in the middle of a sentence, right? All of those have to be taken into consideration. But it's just interesting to note that the very first halacha in the Rav Shulchan Aruch deals with the idea of mechusar amana. And perhaps the idea is to teach us that even though we're just introducing these laws, you have to be very, very careful about how you even speak when you're conducting business. Even though you're not, a lot of times people come across as big machers and wheel and deal and make deals, and then call back the next day and say, I've decided not to do it. And they have no compunction whatsoever.
Now overarching good faith, contractual performance, such that you cannot even exclude it from any contract by terms that says you cannot lie, mislead, and all this sort of stuff, failing which the contract is void. That's the last thing that the Supreme Court can.
Really? Interesting. Okay. All right, so we're going to hold it here for today. And just so good, something good to keep in mind. All right. Have a great day, everyone.